Bird Box is a post-apocalyptic film that was released by Netflix on December 21st, played by Sandra Bullock. It's a film that has generated great controversy for not touching or explaining the fundamental mystery that it ensembles, leaving open the end and provoking in all those who saw it the same question. Who is it, or what are those monsters that caused the death of the people in the movie? Today we will look closely at the story hidden in it and try to give an explanation to what these monsters were in Bird Box. This film was written by the same writers of the film Arrival, and just as this one, it is full of metaphors. Many of the things that happen in the film could reference to the film Arrival, such as the birds in the cages that warn when the monsters are close. Even some people have theorized that perhaps they occur in the same universe. I do not think that this is the case, because the events of Arrival are not mentioned in the film and vice versa. But seeing the origin of this film, we can notice that it is inspired by a novel of 2014 called Bird Box. Arrival was released in 2016, so we must understand that perhaps the Bird Box book inspired the film Arrival while it was being made. But what is the hidden symbolism in this movie? Yesterday, one of my subscribers named Eduardo left me an explanation that could give a metaphorical perspective to the film, and it says the following. The creatures of Bird Box symbolize depression, the children hope, the birds symbolize the happy moments and the memories that should be protected, which help in the most critical moments. Fugitives who do not use bandages symbolize people who appreciate death. All the people who were in the house that go through difficult times were linked by depression. An unwanted pregnancy, an annoying woman with her husband, a retired nerd, and the woman with the lack of self-love who is always looking to please others. Everyone was in a critical personal moment trying to recover. However, the shadow symbolized by depression came to mind with thoughts of suicide. Finally, we are presented to the blind. Those would be the ones who learn to deal with depression and understood that despite the difficulties, the birds were always going to help. That is, the happy moments. This perception of the film reminds me in a certain way to Harry Potter, since the explanation is similar to what is usually described by J.K. Rowling of the monsters created by her called Dementors. These shadow beings take away the happiness of people and are a metaphor for the depression that the writer suffered while writing the book. If we look at Bird Box from this perspective, it could make more sense. Maybe the movie is not as literate as we think. If in fact it is a metaphor for depression, this would explain the suicide of different people and those strange attitudes of seeing the monsters. Also, the whole film shows how Sandra Bullock is going in a river with two children blindfolded. This could be a metaphor to continue in life by different obstacles, paddling against the current even when you don't know where you're going. Now, in my opinion, although I think that this interpretation is very valid, I also believe that not everything that happens is a metaphor. That in the context of the film, if the monsters existed, even though we never saw them. But what were those creatures, and why did they lead people to act in this way? We must first see what the movie shows us. In one scene, we can see how one of the characters draws several sketches of what appears to be the monster, but all the sketches are different. We cannot know for sure how these monsters really are, although this could mean that each person sees them differently. But how was this monster in reality? This was revealed by the actress Sandra Bullock. She explained that a scene was recorded in which a person entered disguised with a green suit to a room. It is a costume that is usually used in special effects. It also had a baby face on the top of its head and grunted while walking. Sandra Bullock confessed that while they were recording, she could barely look at it because it caused her too much laughter. This scene was finally erased from the movie. The Bird Box director did not want to show the monster at any time and said he felt pressured by Netflix to do so. So they recorded a dream sequence showing these mysterious creatures. This same sequence is what Sandra refers to. This scene would show how the monsters actually are something similar to a snake. But when they sat in the editing room, the director did not like how this revelation was and finally decided to remove it from the movie. Maybe in the future, in an extended version, we can see this deleted scene. The description of the monsters from the perspective of the director was something similar to a snake. We know that they also attack the psyche of people, leading them to confront their worst fears and finally making them take their own lives. We can also see that some people who have had contact with these beings don't take their lives away, but rather work for them. Therefore, this shows that these beings have some sort of intelligence, capable of causing suicide and putting people to work for them. Another interesting element is that birds react to these creatures. We can also see a scene with several sensors in a car that detects them. If it's certain that they are physical and organic beings, this would rule out the theory that it is a government weapon or a spiritual being. The hypothesis that they are extraterrestrial beings is present in this film, but there is no evidence to their arrival. I think the explanation would be different. In my understanding, the most complete hypothesis that could explain what these creatures really are is the following. These beings do not really want to harm us, but rather they are beings from another dimension that observe us, and when humans observe them back, suffer an episode of dementia. For example, a person who suffers epileptic seizures when exposed to different changes of light will suffer an episode seeing certain types of light. This does not mean that the light itself has the intention of causing damage, but rather there are certain people susceptible to this type of light changes. This hypothesis proposes that the creatures work in the same way. They come from another dimension, a dimension superior to the human one, and that by observing them, it simply affects the brain. This hypothesis would also explain why some people are able to survive after seeing the creatures. They do not want to harm us. They do not want to kill us. It would also explain why people can move while not observing them. As I mentioned in the beginning, this film was inspired by a book with the same name. In the book is discussed the possibility that those creatures do not really know what they're doing to us. There is never a mention of any creature touching a person directly. They only have a negative effect when observed. But how did these beings come from another dimension to this reality? In the book, a reference is made to something called the Russian report. Some people think that in Russia during an experiment, a dimensional portal was opened and allowed these creatures to enter our planet. You can see a woman seeing these creatures saying they are beautiful and then proceeds to take her life away, confirming even more that these creatures are not evil, but rather it's an effect that causes in the human mind when they observe them. The human brain cannot handle reality or accept that these creatures are real, so they instinctively decide to take their own life. This explanation, in my opinion, gives a full sense to the film. This would explain why these creatures are not shown on the screen. It explains why these creatures do not touch humans and why some survive to observe, but still lose their minds. If you pay attention, everything starts in Russia. They have also theorized that it could be something more similar to the film The Happening, in which several people committed suicide because the same planet began to eliminate humans using a type of pheromones to poison the air. Although I think that the explanation of these creatures being from another dimension is a much more interesting one, it gives the film its full meaning. Now, the real intention of this story was not to show the creatures. Like in the book, it wants us to put ourselves in the shoes of people at their worst moment and experience feeling paranoid and the fear of not being able to see what surrounds us. That there is a danger that we cannot observe, but that is there watching us. From the depression of the different problems of the characters and how they manage to overcome them in the end. This is more of a personal movie and not so much a fight against creatures. But tell me, what do you think about them? What interpretation do you give to the story? And tell me if you agree with the hypothesis of creatures from another dimension. Do you think they really were not bad? If you like this video, do not forget to give it a thumbs up and share it. If you have not done so yet, don't forget to subscribe. And remember, don't assume anything, question everything. This was Theater Theory.